Hi, my name is Elizabeth McPherson, and this is my presentation regarding the Safe Schools material for AEP 880. So the first article that I reviewed from the module was three essential priorities for school principals. So this article indicated three things that were really important for school principals to look at in their school. So the first one was emphasizing a caring and inclusive school environment. So this first point is something that I noticed in almost every article that I reviewed. It's just continuing this conversation that when kids matter, when they know that they are valued, that they are cared about, and that they are accepted in the school environment, that those relationships can build and things like safety and kind of social emotional well-being can be put in place because they know that they are taken care of at school. The second tip that was in this article was that staff and faculty need to be equipped to be their own leaders. So this really relied heavily on understanding that if we're not training our teachers on things like social emotional health, inclusive school environment, cultural relevancy, all of those things, that we're kind of missing out. So teachers need to be provided training. And when we hire people, we need to understand how they're going to fit into our school culture, how they're going to fit into the kind of clientele that we have with students, and kind of how that they are going to grow into leaders in our school. What, potential growth do we see for them as we're hiring them? And then the last point this article points out is collaborating with your community. This is another one that shows up in quite a few articles, is that when community engagement is in your school, it's a healthier school. So partnering with families, community resources, mental health resources, all that kind of stuff. And not only engaging with them and asking them to kind of participate with you, but continuing that two-way communication. Make sure that families can contact you, you can contact them, that events or resources that happen kind of outside the school to support school feel like there's that two-way communication. Um, and just make sure that you're identifying and using as many community partners as you can. The second resource that I previewed was how feeling respected transforms a student relationship to school. So again, this goes back to one of those points in the last article, is that inclusive environment. So it has been shown that suspension really no longer is making any meaningful behavior modifications. For a very, very small percentage of students, is suspension actually changing any behavior? Actually, it's probably having the adverse effect of what we were hoping for. Now suspension is linked to more student dropouts and a higher interaction with law enforcement. So we're noticing that the kids that we are suspending are actually out of school longer and in trouble more. And so I thought this was an interesting part of this article, talking about respect. When teachers were asked or kind of thought about respect, it came more in that umbrella of cooperation and compliance. Are kids doing what I ask when say that they need to do it, how I say I need to do it, kind of doing what they need to do? When students talk about respect, they talk about more of that humanity aspect. Do teachers know who I am, care who I am, and kind of be a part of who I am? So I thought that was a really interesting definition of how kind of adults and students viewed respect differently. Um, they identify that one of the feelings that students need to feel at school is that teachers believe in them. That if they don't come to school and have teachers or trusted adults that they feel like believe in the potential, that we see less successful students. And so things that they encourage teachers to do were write notes on tests and homework, just words of affirmation, send letters home, call home, anything you need to do. And again, that last piece that kind of ties into all of this is prioritize those relationships. Students are going to have better relationships at school. They're going to have better behavior at school. They're going to treat other kids better when teachers are practicing empathy with them, understanding where they're coming from and helping them. And then also just kind of accepting some of those racial stereotypes that we have in our schools. They are real. It's part of the relationships that you're trying to build with students to kind of break through those stereotypes. And all of those kind of things are important. The next article, creating a warm and inclusive classroom environment. This again goes back to that first article, that inclusive school. So this was the first article kind of said, hey, we need inclusive schools. This article really kind of hammers down how. How can you create a classroom or a school that kids want to be a part of? So their ideas were to express mutual respect, provide procedures and strategies, and this kind of also goes down to another bullet point on here, using agendas, making sure kids know what's expected of them at any point in the day. Using decor and desk arrangement, so making that environment feel homey. If all the desks are just in a row and the walls are white, it might feel a little more stale than doing cooperative learning groups, putting some posters on the wall, putting student work on the wall. Create classroom traditions. Do something that your kids can rely on. I know, having a daughter who's in first grade now, she had a lot of special traditions in kindergarten that she would kind of come home and be excited to share with us. Do class meetings. Make sure everyone feels like they have a voice and a say in your classroom environment. Use those agendas again. Teach self-advocacy. Do kids come into your classroom and feel like they have a voice, that it's going to be heard, and that their voice is going to make a change? I think that's really important. And then listen to your students, honestly. If kids are coming to school and never feel heard, they're not going to feel like they're included. So the last article that I reviewed through the module assignments was the strategies for building a productive and positive learning environment. So again, this is, we know you should be doing it, but how do we do it? So their first point is make learning relevant. So do students feel like their talents and interests are being engaged through the material that you're presenting them with? And if they do, that typically leads to more success and happiness in the school environment. So students are going to be more attentive and engaged when we're giving them relevant learning, things that match their interest, their age level, their culture, their community, things like that. The second tip was to develop a code of conduct. Again, going back to, if kids don't know how they're supposed to act or what they are supposed to do, you're kind of opening Pandora's box for a whole world of problems. So when you clearly define positive and negative behaviors, when you explicitly say what respect and kindness look like, students are far more likely to meet that demand because they understand the criteria. And then the last one is employ a positive action curriculum. So understand that culture shapes the perspectives of the people in your room, adults and students, and emphasize things like positive self-imaging, emphasize problem solving, time management, and admit to making mistakes, teachers and students. I think one of the most powerful things I've learned as a teacher is to just own up to it. If I make a mistake, if I make an error on grading something, if I say something that's incorrect, if I'm unkind or short-tempered or anything like that, is being willing to kind of admit those things to my students. So I picked 4 of my own resources to talk about how we can be proactive in kind of this response to bullying. So the first article I chose is called Why Teaching Kindness in Schools is Essential to Reduce Bullying. I picked this because I think it emphasizes a lot of what the other article said about inclusive, welcoming, warm schools. Kids need to understand that there's an alternative to being mean. And maybe not even an alternative, but they need to understand what being mean really is. And kind of, in my opinion, to do that, we can go the opposite way and show what kindness is. So the article kind of points out that science proves that kindness works. It changes your brain, it produces endorphins, and really it's one of those kind of experiential learning kind of things. Kindness can be talked about. You can sit in a morning meeting and talk about being kind all you want, but until kids feel what it's like to be kind or have someone be kind back to them, it's really, that kind of seals the deal. And then kindness activates areas of the brain associated with pleasure, social connection, and trust. So the more that we foster kindness, the more kind of science backs us up that our kids are going to be happier and healthier. Kindness in school begins with connections with people, and with this high level of mental health in classrooms in general right now, it's really, really important that we're kind of fostering these elements of mental and social well-being. And then kindness is the opposite of bullying. It promotes friendships, it creates those relationships, and so it really can just start to eliminate all of those pieces that disconnect us with bullying and can reconnect us with kindness. The second article I chose is what are the best ways to prevent bullying in school? So again, we know we should be having all these things and we know we don't want bullying in schools, but what can we actually do to change the amount of bullying we're seeing in our schools? So the first idea they had was, again, to not look at everything as equally effective. Not every kid who bullies, not every kid who has a misbehavior should have the same consequence. Every situation is different. So a lot of programs, a lot of anti-bullying or kind of zero tolerance policy programs are like all about the discipline. So This we find disproportionately targets students of color, especially, and it also just in general doesn't really work to just always focus on the discipline. But on the flip side, we can't just talk about anti-bullying and we can't just raise awareness or like, oh, October is no bullying month, but then have no follow through when kids are not following through with some of those policies. Again, we come back to positive school climate, feeling like a belonging at school, building relationships, teacher preparedness, being ready when kids come into your room to have an idea of how to promote that culture and climate in your classroom, and getting parents involved in it. Send things home like, we're going to talk about, you know, compliments. And so work on compliments at home, have your child practice compliments, anything that can get people involved at what you're doing at school. And then lastly, this social emotional learning. I am a teacher in a classroom of students who have mental health diagnosis, so I understand how imperative it is for teachers to be able to teach students this kind of self worth, this self value, and some of this emotional regulation. So, self awareness, self management, social awareness, the awareness of others, a responsible decision making. I would like to tell this person I think they're stupid, but how can I counteract that thought in my head and make some of these responsible decision making pieces to build relationships? Another article I read was a comprehensive plan to prevent bullying. So again, I tried to find some of these resources that kind of were like, okay, I know I don't want bullying, but what do I actually do to stop it? So here again, they bring up this kind of old way of thinking. So this article brings up the fact that, there was a time where we all kind of thought getting picked on was a rite of passage. They'll grow out of it, it toughens their skin, kind of that like get up, brush it off kind of mentality. And now we're understanding the real major public health crisis that can cause. And I honestly think a lot of that comes with social media. I think asking a kid who got, you know, pushed at the playground to brush it off is a lot different than, some of the mean and nasty things kids are saying to each other on, online, on Facebook, on social media. So definitely a new shift from kind of just like kids will be kids to a really serious mental health concern. Again, no evidence that the zero tolerance policy really works. It's, what are we reporting? How are we reporting it? And what's the benefit of it is pretty much non-existent. So some best practices would be getting programs in your school that involve students, clubs, community events, volunteer opportunities, mentoring opportunities. Start some intervention groups for kids. Find those kids that you think are falling through the crack or are at risk of some of these things and pull them into these programmings. And then really utilize social emotional skills and de-escalation strategies in your classroom. This is not about punishment. It's not about who's bigger and whose, bite is the worst. It's about teaching kids to cope and kind of create self-worth and learn how to manage themselves. The other thing that this talked about was some federal partners that are available in bullying prevention. So one of the suggestions was to use consistent language about bullying. So are we understanding bullying as a whole, as everyone? Using data to target issues and create policies. What is actually happening in our school? Something we learn about bullying at a national convention might not be happening in our school. So what does data say about our school specifically? Understand the roles of stigma, bias, stereotype, and prejudice. Again, those cultural components are very real. Give training to every person in your building who works with kids. Don't just train teachers, train custodians, train bus monitors, train crosswalk staff. Any adult that's going to interact with a child should know about how to help prevent bullying. And then really pull in and utilize social media companies that can help you kind of do some of that social media training. All right, the last article that I looked at was called Six Ways Educators Can Prevent Bullying in Schools. So these this is actually a really good summary of, I think, a lot of the articles that I had already read. So teach empathy and kindness, help kids understand how to problem solve in a way that respects everyone. Create opportunities for connections, build those inclusive, warm classrooms. The quote here is, when students feel connected to their peers, their schools, and their communities, they do better. And I think we would all, as educators, probably agree with that. Identify getaway behaviors. I think this is so key. I am doing this with my own 6-year-old, is just looking for some of those things that start, an eye roll, a name call, excluding someone, just those little things that we, again, those kids will be kids behaviors that can really snowball into really large bullying issues. Use the arts. So this article kind of emphasized that this creative outlet of drama, literature, visual arts could really help kids open up and talk about some of the struggles that they have. Minimize concentric circles in school. So make sure that yourself, your staff, and your students are addressing the culture that you have in school. The little groups and kind of the cliques and the things that kind of start some of that negative social behavior happens in adults and in kids. And so we need to be aware of that. And then participate in simulations. Make sure your teachers and your kids know, hey, this is what bullying looks like. These are the words you might hear. These are the actions you might see. You might be a bystander. You might be actually getting bullied. Maybe you're the bully, and help kids and staff understand what that would feel like to be in each of those situations and what they could do as a response. So here's what I saw from the bullying data in the module. What's happening? So we're seeing things like name calling, teasing, rumors, pushing, shoving, hitting, leaving, threatening, stealing, sexual comments or gestures, and email or blogging. I found it interesting how low the technology thing was on here, but I think something to consider is that name calling and teasing and that rumors for our kids in 2020, a lot of that is starting through text, through instant messenger, through Facebook and social media. A lot of those bullying pieces start somewhere at home and come into the school. So we're seeing it in the classrooms, hallways, cafeteria, gym, bathroom, outside. Things that I notice about this list are these are the spaces kids can be away from an adult the easiest. These are the places where we can whisper something and it gets unnoticed. So those open spaces, so to speak. So I think the things to consider that might be missing to help prevent or kind of make progress in these areas are making sure places are monitored. My school has an incredible amount of hallway monitors, and I think it's helped dramatically. There's two in the cafeteria all the time, even when there's not kids for lunch. There's one in every single hallway. There's one by every single exit. We are constantly kind of catching our kids in the hallway. I think that advocacy piece is huge. Do our kids understand how to stand up for someone who's being bullied, how to stand up for themselves if they're being bullied? Do they know how to recognize when they are being the bully? Are we training our staff to identify what bullying is? Are we putting in appropriate consequences? So again, those zero tolerance policies aren't really working, but what are we doing? And then implementing those social emotional learning pieces, which I think are huge. So I think what can happen when bullying is prevented is that we see academics increase, test scores, class scores, comparison to national averages. I just think that when we eliminate some of that fear of bullying or kind of that bully culture, we see students thrive. I think we see student engagement increase. Kids don't just want to come in, put their head down, and leave. They want to try basketball. They want to try band. They want to try debate club. You know, kids who are getting bullied are not going to subject themselves to extra time with kids who might be mean to them. I think we see staff retention. Teachers want to be at school. I've been at schools with some pretty rough behavior, and it's hard to want to be there. You don't feel like the problem's getting solved, that the kids are getting the resources that they want. But when we can start to prevent some of these things, we'll keep teachers longer, which, overall will impact the school. And then I think to consider the lifelong impact of our students. When bullying is prevented, when kids feel safe at school, they're more likely to go to college. They're more likely to hold a job. They're more likely to have a meaningful relationship that might result in maybe family in the future. They're more likely to participate in their community by volunteering or working with a club or, getting into a nonprofit organization, all of those things. So in general, we just find that students can become more connected in healthy ways without that fear of rejection. So these are the resources I used, and thank you for viewing my presentation.